everyone, I'm Joe and this is the 4-week Bach challenge. Over the next 4 weeks I'm going to learn and perform all 24 of the preludes and fugues from Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach. Will I succeed? Will I fail spectacularly? Join me and let's find out together. So I've been noticing a lot of these 30-day challenges going around the internet, but they tend to be centered around muscles or getting in shape, and I don't really have a ton to contribute in that field, but I can contribute Bach, so I figured I would do that. I picked Book 2 mainly because it's not as familiar to me. I had Book 1 in high school, as a lot of people did, and all of us, I think, know the first prelude from Book 1. So I thought it might be interesting to explore Book 2, which is a little bit lesser well known. So I'm going to be doing, as I mentioned, one prelude and fugue every day, taking one day off a week, so that'll make it an exactly 4-week challenge. One of the things I really like about Bach is that I think that he encourages an active listening approach. Most of the music that we consume nowadays is what we call passive listening. So it's on in the background. You're listening to it, but you're not really paying super close attention to it. And Bach is someone who really rewards close listening or careful listening. I was trying to think of an analogy to modern music, and I thought of something like Hamilton. So for people who love Hamilton, you can't get everything out of it by listening to it one time. You have to listen to it more than once. It's just there's just a lot to listen to. You need to listen very closely. And every time you listen to it, you start to unpack more layers of it. And Bach is exactly the same way, if not more so. You can listen to Bach dozens and dozens of times and you just find out more and more stuff. I think the difference between Bach and Hamilton is that Hamilton is current and Bach was written a very long time ago. So for some people, we might not even know where to begin when listening with Bach. And that's one thing that I would like to help with right now. So the word fugue often connotes something that's very difficult to listen to. It's very complicated, it's very academic. And actually, the basics of fugue is actually very simple. It's a form that has one theme, only one theme, and that theme is called the subject. The subject is always presented completely by itself at the beginning of the piece. So for example, the very first fugue has this subject. And it's that beginning with the subject by itself, that's so characteristic of a fugue. After the subject is presented by itself in one voice, the next voice enters with the subject as well, then the next voice, and so on and so forth until all the voices are entered. In the fugues in Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, all of the fugues either have 3 or 4 voices. What is a voice, you might ask? Well, you might imagine a trio of singers or a quartet of singers where each of them sings their own part, and we can simulate that on the piano. So that's what we mean when we say voices. Some of this might be easier for me to just demonstrate, so let me show you how that works. So here's the subject of the first fugue. That's a typical subject. It's about the normal length, about 3 or 4 measures. I'd like you to take another listen to it and see if you can listen a little bit more intentionally. See if you can pick out specific features of the subject. So like all of Bach's subjects, it begins with an extremely catchy figure. And all of Bach's subjects are like that. Because he's very good at writing fugues, his subjects always have something to pull you in right at the beginning. Then the second half of the subject is like this. It's not quite as recognizable, but it has a lot of energy to it. It has a lot of notes to it. I'd like you to now listen to the entire opening section. So we're going to hear the subject by itself in the middle voice, or the alto. Then we're going to hear it on the top, or the soprano, and then finally in the bottom, or the bass. Brings us to the end of the first section. So after the subject has been presented in all the voices, usually we move into the next section, which is called an episode. And an episode is simply a section where we don't hear the subject at all. And that's exactly what happens in this fugue. Stuff that's like the subject. But it's not the subject, because the subject would have to have the second half as well. That's not what happens. It's instead what happens. So there's something that goes on. So, and really all a fugue is there's sections that contain the subject, which are called expositions, alternating with these episodes, which are sections that do not contain the subject. It's not really important to remember the names unless you're interested in talking about fugues with your friends for some reason. But all that's really important to remember is that there will be sections where you hear the subject and sections where you don't hear the subject. I'd like to continue where I stopped and see if you can spot the next entrance of the subject and see if you can see which voice it's in. In the soprano, right at the very end. So that signals that we're in the next section, which is the next exposition. And really, the joy of listening to a fugue is just watching for those entrances. Is it going to be at the top? Is it going to be in the middle? The middle ones are the really hard ones to hear. Is it going to be in the bottom? Right there in the bass. It's always great fun when it comes down in the bass voice, kind of like the elephant of the piano. And that's really step one of listening to a fugue. So I hope that's enough to get you started and listening to fugues. It can be a very simple form, it can be very complicated. I'm hoping in a future video to talk about some of the more complicated techniques that Bach uses. But really all you need to do is identify the subject and listen for it. That's really all there is in listening to a fugue. I hope also that you'll join me in this 4-week challenge in setting aside about 5 minutes every day to listen to one of these as I upload them. You'll find that it's a very centering and very spiritual practice to listen to this music just for a few minutes every day, either to start the day or end the day. I'm hoping to do the uploads in the evening. We'll see depending on how the technology works and that kind of thing. If you like this, I hope you'll subscribe, comment, ask me questions, and tell your friends.